Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto this week, even with the federal government shutdown now reaching a month, multiple reports say that President Trump could reschedule cannabis this month. We'll talk with NORML's political director, Morgan Fox.
Yeah, anybody in Ohio who cares about voting rights and individual liberty, but also the responsibility of politicians to support the will of their constituents, should be appalled at what's happening right now.
Ohio legislators continue to roll back adult use cannabis rules while recriminalizing purchases from out of state. On top of that, they want even tougher restrictions on THC-infused hemp beverages and products. Plus, in Massachusetts, violence on the streets of Fall River, where a former mayor gets attacked outside the dispensary he works at. Will Flanagan is now in serious condition in the hospital while police arrest the alleged person responsible for that attack. And in Florida, Smart and Safe Florida is suing the state over tactics to invalidate over 200,000 signatures collected to put the adult use question back on the ballot for 2026. And what will you be dressing up as on Halloween? We've got cannabis-themed ideas for you all on our international reports and on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto next.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCM-TV's weekly documentation of the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. I'm Alaina Pinto. Last week, we told you about a weed whisperer at the White House who called rescheduling good politics. And now, word out of the White House is that the president might finally impact federal reform by rescheduling cannabis at the federal level before the end of this month, which is only a few days away. But don't count on that. In fact, you might want to wager on what will come first, rescheduling or the government reopening. Executive producer Jimmy Young talked to NORML's political director Morgan Fox for an update on that and a few other hot-button issues in the states, including Ohio.
Thanks, Alaina. And again, anytime there's something going on nationally, federally, or even in each state, NORML is really the go-to source to talk to. And we're so happy and lucky to have someone like Morgan Fox in the speed dial, if you will, of the Cannabis Coast to Coast News resources. And Morgan, thank you so much for joining me here. And we could talk a little bit about what the specifics are in Ohio, but to me, the bigger picture is legislators not agreeing to what ballot questions have been handed them as law, and they want to change it. This is actually a big slap in the face again to our democratic system, isn't it?
Yeah, anybody in Ohio who cares about voting rights and individual liberty, but also the responsibility of politicians to support the will of their constituents, should be appalled at what's happening right now. The fact that they're not only changing what voters approved in issue 2 back in 2023, but are also doing so in a rushed fashion and not providing the people really time to even read the law, let alone speak up about it before they're holding votes on it, is really just horrific.
And speaking of that kind of thing, here in Massachusetts, I'm sure you know that the SAM group is behind an initiative to get a rollback the adult use cannabis market onto the ballot in 2026. That supposedly, according to reports, they're close to their limit of 76,000 signatures. They keep saying they're going to get to 100,000. What's going on here? I mean, Massachusetts is supposed to be a cradle of liberty here, and it's been a pretty vibrant market, but it looks like Sam is trying to exert their influence on these kinds of states.
Well, this is just another example, including Ohio, of massive attempts to roll back our hard-fought victories over the last decade or so. Just to backtrack a little bit in Ohio, what the House just approved in their rush vote in addition to some legislation that I think is really the key aspect of it, which is some hemp regulation, which is pretty restrictive, or synthetics regulation. But this bill will restrict the places that people are able to legally consume cannabis. It makes it so that you're only allowed to keep 2.5 ounces of your harvest from a home cultivation in your house at any time. It makes it illegal to possess cannabis that was not purchased in Ohio or that you can prove was grown at home in Ohio. And it makes it so that it is impossible to carry cannabis that is not in its original unopened container or in the trunk of your car. These are things that are going to result in more arrests, more enforcement costs, and significantly less freedom for Ohioans. In Massachusetts, we're seeing an effort by a number of well-funded prohibitionists to put a ballot initiative out there that would essentially recriminalize the regulated cannabis market, as well as create a pathway for additional penalties for even simple possession, as well as other cannabis-related behavior that's innocuous and victimless. We're starting to hear reports that voters are being misled when they are signing the petitions to get this thing on the ballot, which I certainly would not put it past most prohibition groups. So I think that it really just highlights that our fight is not over, even post-legalization. We need to keep working on state legislators to protect the rights of cannabis consumers, and we need to stay vigilant for attempts to roll back these laws coming from private organizations, and make sure to hold their feet to the fire the way that they have with us for years. I'm talking about challenging the petition counts. I'm talking about challenging the methodology. They've been litigating against us for years, and it's time to give them a taste of their own medicine.
One more note from Washington, D.C. The U.S. Supreme Court will be ruling on whether regular users of cannabis should be banned from owning guns. Cases like these have been challenged in lower courts, but now the Supreme Court will rule on the constitutionality of the right to bear arms if you are a regular consumer or patient using cannabis. Of course, it might help sway that ruling if the president decides to move on the rescheduling of cannabis to Schedule 3 of the CSA. That at least will recognize the plant with medicinal value and move it off Schedule 1, a place where it has lived since 1971 under then President Richard Nixon. Next up, the battle continues in Ohio, where the legislature there continues to try to roll back some of the gains that industry made at the ballot box last year. The House in Ohio passed a very controversial bill this past week that limits THC percentage and recriminalizes out-of-state purchases. Plus, they put more severe regulations over THC-infused beverage products. And when it comes to hemp, we are lucky to have Kerry Hinkle every week. Here's his report this week.
Hi there, I'm Kerry Hinkle with Bayou City Hemp out of Houston, Texas, and I'm back again with another hemp report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This week, we turn our attention back to Ohio, where you may remember recently the governor, Mike DeWine, issued an executive order attempting to ban all hemp products. Now, this executive order has been stopped in the courts, a temporary restraining order has been issued, and a hearing date has now been pushed into December. So while the governor has not been able to unilaterally ban these products, part of the political messaging in the executive order was to put pressure on the legislature to finally enact some regulations on hemp products. For years now, we've seen bills die in the State House that had varying degrees of restrictions on THC limits and where you could sell the products, and yet every bill has continued to fail. And that's why the governor issued his executive order, and that's now why this week we saw SB 56 sail its way through the House Judiciary Committee. This bill is quite interesting in that it allows for 5 milligram THC beverages to be sold on draft in restaurants and bars, and anything up to 10 milligrams of THC on the beverage side can be sold in mainstream channels like convenience stores and grocery. Whereas edibles and gummies of 1 milligram of THC and below are fine, but anything above that 1 milligram mark would now be restricted to hemp dispensary licensees and the traditional regulated cannabis market. So For some reason, a 1 milligram gummy, you have to go to a dispensary, but a 10 milligram beverage, you can go to Kroger and buy, theoretically. The bill has not made it through the Senate yet, and we understand a conference committee could be assigned if the Senate disagrees with this approach, and some more deal making has to be done. But the reason I want to report on this state and specifically this bill is it's emblematic as the alcohol industry continues to lobby on behalf of the protections of hemp-derived THC beverages, and perhaps that forsakes other categories like tinctures, tablets, and topicals. So we will continue to report as SB 56 moves in Ohio. And for Bayou City Hemp and Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Kerry Hinkle. We'll see you again next week.
With more details on what's going on in her state of Ohio, here's Christina Brisson.
I'm Christina Brisson with Over the Top Renovations with your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News. So let's talk about what's happening here recently. So now the Ohio legislation, as of the House, has passed Senate Bill 56 with the 18th revision of all the different clauses and what it's going to cover and not cover. So it's going to go back to the Senate. And as you all know, like I said, we've done this 1,000 times already with this bill and a lot of different language differences. This bill is talking about allowing 400 dispensaries of hemp, intoxicating hemp dispensaries, I should say. It's not specifying, from what I saw, between medical dispensaries and not, and how those licenses are going to work and or what those fees are going to be. So we're going to see what that is going to look like and what those details are going to entail. So hopefully that will be that happy medium we need between these businesses here in Ohio and the dispensaries, where you're not paying $400,000 for a license, but also our products are safe for the public. So hopefully more on that is going to come. Again, I am Christina Brisson with Over the Top Renovations with your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The state of Florida has the nation's largest medical cannabis program with over 800,000 registered patients. The governor there, Ron DeSantis, continues to treat that industry like public enemy number one. However, that hasn't deterred the Smart and Safe Florida group. They are the advocates who are trying to get the adult use question back on the ballot in the fall of 2026. And you might remember that the pro cannabis vote came up a few percentage points short of its goal of 60%, which by state law will change the Constitution in order to become law. So the Smart and Safe Florida group has been busy out collecting hundreds of thousands of signatures. Again, getting those signatures verified is now the next battle, and the Smart and Safe group is now going to court. That group is suing the state of Florida over their verification process that they continue to rig against their efforts. Nothing is easy in the cannabis industry, and governments continue to make it as difficult as possible to use the tools allowed for political change, like a ballot question. The battlefield for hemp is also not an easy road for industry, and now that battle is coming to Arizona. Karen Black has that story in her Arizona report.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. We have an update on the ongoing battle between the Hemp Industry Trade Association of Arizona and Attorney General Chris Mays. The Arizona Court of Appeals has officially scheduled oral arguments for November 14th on whether the state can legally ban Delta 8, Delta 10, and THC-infused beverages from unlicensed retailers. The temporary stay remains in effect, meaning these intoxicating hemp products can continue to be sold while the case proceeds. And there's a parallel playing out with another plant-based substance. A recent investigation shows unregulated magic mushroom products are flooding Arizona head shops and liquor stores. These aren't psilocybin. They're legal Amanita muscaria mushrooms marketed as psychoactive supplements. Industry watchers say it's the same regulatory gray zone that allowed hemp-derived cannabinoids to proliferate before AG Mays stepped in. The question now, will the state crack down on mushrooms the same way it did with hemp? Meanwhile, Tucson's D2 Dispensaries is tackling a different kind of sustainability challenge. The company launched EcoPride.com, an educational initiative addressing Arizona's cannabis water consumption crisis. D2 publicly disclosed that its operations use an average of 143,000 gallons monthly, and the company has cut that by 40% over 2 years using enclosed irrigation and filtration systems. D2 is now calling for statewide production limits and industry-wide transparency as legislators weigh water regulation for cannabis cultivation. That focus on conservation may become even more critical as Arizona eyes future growth. A recent study from the University of Nevada ranks Arizona 8th nationally for cannabis export potential once federal rescheduling allows interstate commerce. With Arizona's greenhouse-grown flower selling at just $600 a pound, among the cheapest in the West, more operators may want to think seriously about water management if the state is positioned to compete with California, Nevada, and Colorado in cross-border sales. Lastly, in Mesa, the Earl Cup held its Fall Cannabis Awards Festival last weekend. Thousands turned out for the consumer-judged competition that Secret shops dispensaries statewide. Winners will be announced once all laboratory testing is complete, and results will be posted at theearlcup.com. That's all for this week's Arizona Report. I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Back here on the East Coast, a very upsetting story emerged this week with a random act of senseless violence. It happened in the city of Fall River, Massachusetts, which is located 52 miles south of the state capital, Boston. A former mayor of Fall River, Will Flanagan, was attacked outside the dispensary he runs and is now in serious condition in the hospital. The man responsible for that is now in custody, and Curtis Emery has more in his Bay State Report.
I'm Curtis Emery, a bud tender from Resonate in Worcester, Massachusetts, with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. It's been a sombering news week here in the Commonwealth. Our first story, an act to restore sensible marijuana policy, an initiative which seeks to wipe out the licensed adult use cannabis sales and market here in the state, is apparently well on its way to reaching 100,000 signatures by December 3rd. Now, if the petition can gain those signatures, it needs about 73,000 more signatures to reach that 100,000 minimum. It will find itself as a ballot question on next year's voting cycle in November 2026. Surely would be a huge hit to the industry, not to mention the customers all over the state who are currently taking advantage of adult use sales. Also in the news, former Fall River Mayor Will Flanagan was stabbed in broad daylight outside of a dispensary which he is CEO. The former mayor was stabbed in the neck while outside of his dispensary. The cannabis industry is surely watching this as it unfolds. It's not clear whether or not the motive had anything to do with his establishment. However, for those of us who work in dispensaries every day, it's definitely sombering to hear violence near a place of work. Especially at places of work where we see so many people all the time. I've been Curtis Emery with the Bay State Report, Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
There's a mounting concern in the state of Oklahoma where abandoned licensed grow farms have been vacated or shut down. That state started its medical program by handing out licenses like Halloween candy. And now with over 6,000 of these farms abandoned, public health officials believe there is an issue. But now, of course, there is a battle over whose responsibility it is to do something about it. One regulatory group wants the other one to take care of it, and no one seems to have a clue on what to do. That's not the only issue facing the Oklahoma cannabis market, as Kimmie Cannabis explains in her weekly cannabis report from the Sooner State.
I am Kimmie Cannabis with Can I Talk About It with the Oklahoma Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. As I reported last week, many license holders who didn't complete their OBN renewals by September 1st are now facing serious consequences. Companies that failed to secure their Certificate of Occupancy, or COO, have now run out of time. That means they're required to shut down operations on November 1st until they obtain their COO and then completely reapply for their OBNDD license. Industry members say the state fire marshal's office slow-played inspections and delayed approvals, making it nearly impossible for some operators to comply. Many feel the fire marshal and OBNDD have co-inspired in this bottleneck that is now impacting countless businesses across Oklahoma. In other news, OMMA has issued an embargo on Ruby Mays, LLC. The products in question date back as far as 2022 through 2025. This was not about bad medicine, it was about the process. Ruby Mays tested before the entire batch was completed, which is a technical violation of OMMA rules. They tested flour and distillate, passed compliance, and then completed the rest of the batch. Unfortunately, regulations require that all batches be fully produced before testing. Patients statewide are sad to see this happen to a company they've trusted and loved for years. That's it from Can I Talk About It with your Oklahoma Cannabis Coast to Coast report. I'm Kimmie Cannabis. Peace, love, and all that good stuff.
That'll do it for the A Block this week. We have plenty more state reports coming up, as well as the international reports from Europe. Plus, a little later in the program, we'll have the news from New York State, where a major licensee is in trouble after bending the rules on licensing. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this break.
Your cannabis business could be overpaying by hundreds of thousands of dollars in federal income taxes because of one simple assumption that you're making about your accountant. A dispensary owner in Colorado called me frustrated as hell. He'd been working with the same accountant for 3 years. His accountant said, "What's 471C?" Here's what the ignorance of that accountant was costing this business owner: $180,000 every single year for 3 years. 471C has been around since 2017. We're talking about an 8-year-old tax provision that many cannabis CPAs don't fully understand. 471C is one of the most complex and highly debated tax strategies in the cannabis industry. If you want to make sure you're not leaving any money on the table, I'm offering free 471C reviews this month. Link in the description.
Counting Buds has grown into Buds Group, the same award-winning quality, now with more service offerings. Buds Group, your best buds in the biz.
Looking for PR that over-delivers on expectations? At Maverick Public Relations, they pair big agency experience with personalized attention. From launching award-winning brands to securing top-tier media hits, their data-driven communications team helps visionary leaders and entrepreneurs rise above the media noise. Maverick PR is responsive, collaborative, and relentless about results and ROI. Visit themaverickpr.com and make headlines together.
If you want to make history, if you want to be part of history, if you want to say you helped legalize marijuana in America, now is the time to join us.
Welcome back to the B Block, our second section of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto. This is when we go across the pond to Europe to see what is going on in those foreign lands. We start in Zurich, Switzerland, where that country continues to monitor their pilot program for medical patients that it was supposed to end this month, but now it has been extended for 2 more years. Only 2,300 people have been selected so far, but that number is expected to grow to over 3,000 thanks to this extension. Country regulators want to expand distribution to include more women and occasional users. Researchers report that 90% of participants now purchase their cannabis from licensed pharmacies and specialty stores, as opposed to the legacy market in that country. Now let's check in on the UK with Dave Barton.
I'm Dave Barton from Thermador with your UK Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. International patient advocacy group, We the Patients, has announced it will hold its first event in the UK during Medical Cannabis Month. The event, being held on the 7th November at the Charterhouse in the Barbican in London, is being organised in collaboration with UK patient advocacy group Patient Can, and will feature a roster of high-profile speakers, as well as patients sharing their own stories. Attendees can expect insights on cannabis-based chronic pain treatments, as well as shared learning and practical workshops. The event is the latest in a series of European events organised by We the Patients. Another was held in Switzerland last month. reflecting its mission to reshape the conversation around medical cannabis through patient-led advocacy. That's all for this week's UK Report. I'm Dave Barton from Thermidor, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
This is Debbie Facey with the Cannabis Coast to Coast News Report. What we have in Canada this week is Manitoba reaching $170 million when it came to generating a revenue profit, which meant that in a wholesale, they reached $47.3 million, which is absolutely amazing for Manitoba. What we also have is in PEI, they are expressing interest when it comes to selling vape products in their stores, which is going to be amazing for PEI due to the fact that they are losing out on some great products and sales out there. When it comes to Canada, this is the Canadian Coast to Coast News Report. Debbie Facey, have a great one. Peace.
Turning our attention back to this country, the number one state in revenue is California, but while the Golden State is one of the oldest pro-cannabis states in the country, there is still plenty of problems. One alone is that a recent poll of regular cannabis consumers in California are not aware that if you are transporting cannabis in your car, it must be in a sealed container and unopened. According to a recent survey, only 59% of regular cannabis consumers were familiar with that law in their state. In the meantime, there's been plenty of busts in California as law enforcement is cracking down on illegal operations. Dina Naguib has more from her state of California.
I'm Dina Naguib, Principal Consultant at Grass Goddess Consulting, here to give you the latest developments in California for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Last week, Governor Newsom's office announced the results of a 3-month crackdown on illegal cannabis operations around the state. In total, more than 66 tons of cannabis plants valued at more than $200 million were seized. In addition, toxic pesticides were found at illegal grow sites and other crimes were discovered, emphasizing the importance of the legal regulated market. In other news, a new study came out from my alma mater, the University of California, San Diego, which found links between cannabis use and specific parts of the human genome. The study was done in collaboration with genetic testing company 23andMe and had the goal of finding markers that could predict which people are more likely to develop cannabis use disorder. What they found is that there are 2 genes, one which is also linked to impulsive personality disorder, obesity, and cancer metastasis, and another linked to psychiatric disorders, including schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, which were associated with lifetime cannabis use. The study also found that there are more than 100 different traits and almost 50 genes that are associated with lifetime and more frequent cannabis use, demonstrating the complexity of the topic and the need for further studies. That's it for California News this week. I'm Dina Naguib from Grass Goddess Consulting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Now let's take a look at New York. The Empire State continues to work its way through communication issues with the Office of Cannabis Management, and now a licensing scheme has been discovered by those regulators. Omnium Health is in big trouble with the OCM in New York after evidence exposed that the Long Island-based distributor and manufacturer allowed their license to be rented by non-licensed manufacturers and grows. The Office of Cannabis Management is coming down hard on this company that is now facing millions of dollars in fines. There's a total recall of all of their products in the state that are being sold in dispensaries. And on top of that, the company could lose that license that they had been renting out. This company has been under investigation by the Trade Practices Bureau, an enforcement division under the OCM that was formed earlier this year. That group is charged with keeping the licensed, regulated, and legal industry above board, according to their executive director, James Rogers, who said, quote, "This kind of cheating robs compliant businesses of their right to compete in a fair market. If we work together, we can keep New York's cannabis market above board," unquote. Well, now let's check in on Virginia with Joe Parsons.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WB and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. After the success of last year's event, the Virginia Veterans Canna Competition is back for an even bigger and better event planned for this year. The second annual Virginia Veterans Canna Competition is a unique event organized by veterans. It will have educational classes, cannabis grow classes, vendors, live entertainment, and giveaways. This event aims to create a supportive and impactful experience. Tickets for the Saturday event on November 1st are only $25, with camping options and upgrades available. The event will be held at the Second 40 to 420 Farm in Pamplin, Virginia. And since it's Halloween weekend, it should be a pretty spooky good time. Brian Natsky, the founder of Virginia Veterans Canna Competition, is a Navy veteran whose struggles with PSD led him to discover the healing power of cannabis for himself. His hope is that one day the stigma that surrounds the community, especially with veterans, and the plant medicine will be a thing of the past. Until then, he vows to educate as many people on the healing power of cannabis as possible. Finally, with Halloween weekend approaching, I have a suggestion for a creepy, spooky classic to terrify you. The 1936 thriller Reefer Madness, with creepy prohibitionists and enough stigma-inducing terror to give you nightmares for decades. Trust me, I know. Terrifying. I wouldn't recommend watching this alone. Well, that's going to do it for this week from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WB in Charlottesville, and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, happy Halloween and stay lifted.
Another sign that President Trump is ready to move forward with some kind of cannabis reform happened this week when he named a dispensary operator in Michigan the envoy to Iraq. Mark Sevilla is the owner of Leaf and Bud, where 3 dispensaries operating in Detroit, Centerline, and Hazel Park. Sevilla was instrumental in helping the president win in Michigan in the last election, and now is taking on a role as envoy that is very new to the entrepreneur, and he is very well known in Michigan as a pro-cannabis supporter, since it is his image that was used on billboards advertising for the plant medicine in Michigan. And with more on that, here's Amy Carter with the Michigan Report, now sponsored by Wally's Wonder World of handmade, customizable humidors.
This is mold on wheat, this is mold on weed, and this is what this Wonderworld plant is supposed to look like. Do you want to make sure this never happens to your precious flower? Check out the handmade humidors by Fenton, Michigan craftsman Gregory Johnson. Each humidor can hold 1 ounce of your stash, and it comes with a Boveda humidity pack. You care about your flower, so protect it inside a humidor made with American-grown maple, cherry, or sapele wood. Check out their website at wallyswonderworld.com. There you'll find the famous award-winning Hakuna Matata No Worries Humidor. You'll also find a variety of humidors with different designs. They even customize accessories like doobie tubes, grinders, and even a classic roach clip from the 70s. Treat your stash with class with a custom-made, handmade humidor from wallyswonderworld.com, and never worry about moldy weed again.
I'm Amy Carter from Michigan Weedsters, bringing you this week's Michigan Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The top news impacting the industry includes Detroit dispensary owner Mark Sevilla from Leaf and Bud, who was appointed by President Trump as a new special envoy to Iraq. The appointment drew criticism over his cannabis background and limited diplomatic experience. A new Michigan State University study found that about 1 in 6 pregnant women in Michigan use cannabis, with higher rates in some areas. Researchers still caution that use during pregnancy and breastfeeding could be a danger to the infant's health. In the courts, a Menominee County judge denied Puff Cannabis' request to force the city to approve its dispensary, leaving plans in limbo ahead of a voter ordinance. Also, former Skymint CEO Jeff Radaway is being sued by his ex-wife Susan, who alleges a backdoor weed scheme to acquire assets and launch a new business, Fantasy Farms, before diverting funds out of state. Radaway denies the claims. Separately, Michigan State Police seized cannabis plants during a raid in Cortland Township as part of an ongoing investigation. Finally, what critics are calling a legislative assault on Michigan's recreational law, the MRTMA, is causing significant worry. This includes the new 24% wholesale tax on cannabis transfers that was recently passed. Numerous bills have also been introduced, such as Senate Bill 597 and House Bills 5104 to 5107, which would impose strict license caps and recriminalize low-level activity. Critics view these actions as a retreat from legalization and are urging lawmakers to let the CRA stabilize the market instead. It's definitely a time to unite. Please follow the Michigan Weedsters at michiganweedsters.com or on social media to stay informed and get involved. I'm Amy Carter from Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The Michigan Report is sponsored by Wally'sWonderworld.com.
That will do it for the B block or second section of news this week. We've got one more section to go with stories from Illinois, Washington State, Minnesota, and Nevada. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Young, and it's time for School. That's School with a K. I love the name of this platform because it's the first course I'll be teaching where spelling really doesn't count. It's how words sound, how you pronounce them, and how clear your speech is. Do you have the mumbles? Do you have the dreaded itis, gap fillers? The course is called Teaching Generation Text to Talk. I've done this for decades as a professional broadcaster on TV. I've even won an Emmy Award as a sports talk show host for a kids show I co-created in the 1990s for the TV channel that I worked for in Boston. I've mentored hundreds of young people on their journey in the broadcast community, and I'm sure some of them will join me to share what they are doing now. And the whole idea of this is to get people to listen when you talk and to get them to understand you. I use the decades of experience I have in broadcasting to share the tools and exercises that will improve your oral communication skills, even the nonverbal ones. You know, many speech experts believe that 90% of communication is nonverbal. Do you make eye contact? Do you talk with your hands, like I do? Is your handshake firm or wimpy? All these skills will help you build your confidence by putting the phone down and actually talking to people. Do you have a personal elevator pitch? Who are you? Where are you from? What do you do for a living? What distinguishes you or differentiates you from others who might be applying for the same job? I've got 10 one-hour lessons that I'll be offering to individuals or in groups of 5. I call the workshops EPIC. That's E for enunciation, P for pronunciation, I for inflection, and C for cadence. I'll also be offering a free 1 hour, once a week call-in show where you could just join me to ask any questions you want. I've got a background in sports, so I love to talk about that, but I've also built a network for one of the most controversial industries in modern society. That's right, it's the cannabis industry. I'm the executive producer of the nation's only TV news-style show called Cannabis Coast to Coast News with the very talented Alaina Pinto. Now, it's all about learning how to talk, to speak, to communicate like a broadcaster. It's epic. So join my community that I'm calling the Forever Young School of Communication. Sign up for the first course, Teaching Generation Text to Talk. And for now and forever, I'm Jimmy Young, and I look forward to talking to you.
Welcome back to the final section or C block of Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto. More and more companies are relying on data that backs business decisions. The same is true in cannabis, where more and more businesses merge or get acquired during this challenging time. And one company that continues to grow in the data analytics world is Emerald Intel. Based in Maryland, they acquired one of their most well-known competitors this week when they bought Cannabis Media. John Stanfill is the CEO of Emerald Intel, and our executive producer, Jimmy Young, talked with John for this week's NCIA podcast, The Voice of Cannabis.
So Emerald Intel is a business intelligence tool servicing the cannabis and hemp vertical of, North America. So we are tracking all the cannabis and hemp licenses in the U.S. and Canada. We also just recently announced, about 2 weeks ago, the addition of our brand data set, as well as the ancillary businesses that service the cannabis and hemp space. But long story short, our tool, Emerald Intel, was built to help our clients sell and market to their prospects more efficiently, make it easier for them to do their sales and marketing efforts.
That was released on our YouTube channel this past weekend. So now let's check in with the clone guy, Mark Allen, in Illinois.
What's up, everybody? I'm Mark Allen, the Chicago clone guy, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News just outside of Chicago, Illinois. Thanks for tuning in. Lots to talk about today. As always, we're actually going to give you a sneak peek of what I do here at the new facility.
What you're seeing here is the Chicago clone guy starting up a new age humidifier that breaks water molecules down to a non-conductive size, about 1 micron, and won't get anything wet. This is going to keep the clone room nice and humid, exactly where we need it, at 65%, 24/7.
But in other news, the Illinois Department of Agriculture fielded questions and concerns about the new proposed cannabis rules for craft growers, infusers, and transporters. The meeting pretty much revolved around a new rule that would allow infusers to actually infuse their own product. Like, hey, clone guy, don't they already do that? No, they have to buy it from a craft grower and then put it in a bottle themselves. So they're not actually allowed to infuse their own product. So the craft growers don't want to lose that business because they're already hurting for sales, because things are very hard to get accomplished in the state. It's hard to compete, the taxes, the bills. So the craft growers don't want to lose that business, but the infusers can't sell any product because they can't make any business because it's too expensive. So that was interesting. In more news, this might actually contribute to this, is that September sales for cannabis is down. It's the second worst month that we've had of the year. Let's not forget that 2024 was the best year of sales for cannabis Illinois has ever had. It's been increasing every year, but this is the second worst month of 2025. Will this year beat last year's sales? We're going to find out here pretty soon. I'll keep you updated. But that's my report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Mark Allen, the Chicago clone guy. Thanks for tuning in.
Minnesota continues to roll out its first wave of licenses, and in that state, the indigenous tribes are getting first in line opportunities to open up. Tina Tasaka covers the tribal lands, and Alicia Bellamy is in Minnesota. We start with Tina in Nevada.
I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Iconic Representation, and this is the Nevada and Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The United States Supreme Court will review whether regular cannabis users can legally own firearms, a question raised in the case United States versus Hemp. Ali Daniel Hemp was charged with felony gun possession due to habitual marijuana use, but a lower court ruled the federal ban unconstitutional in this context. The Trump administration has appealed, asking the court to reinstate the prohibition. Legal experts say the decision could reshape the intersection of drug laws and Second Amendment rights. Rihanna Durrett, executive director of UNLV's Cannabis Policy Institute, told ARC Nevada that Hemany's case also involves cocaine possession charges, adding complexity to the ruling ahead. Why does this matter? Gun ownership is protected under the Second Amendment. Cannabis use has no similar constitutional protection. Alcohol users, even those who drink heavily, are not banned from owning firearms. Durrett noted that the Supreme Court must evaluate this issue, quote, under historical context, unquote. The outcome could become a landmark precedent in both cannabis policy and firearm rights. Stay tuned for updates from Pro Cannabis Media's Coast to Coast News. Governor Tim Walz signed a tribal state cannabis compact with the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, the fourth tribe in Minnesota to do so, following the White Earth Nation, the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, and the Prairie Island Indian Community.
Happening now, Minnesota's cannabis rollout just took a big step forward. The Office of Cannabis Management and Governor Walz announced a new partnership with the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. The two sides signed a tribal state cannabis compact, a formal agreement outlining how cannabis will be managed and advanced together. The compact also allows tribal nations to team up with state licensed businesses, meaning cannabis grown on tribal land could soon be sold across all of Minnesota. Bruce Savage, chairman of the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, reacted to the agreement. He said the compact reinforces the band's role as sovereign leaders in building a safe and inclusive marketplace. As of today, the Office of Cannabis Management has signed compacts with 3 other tribal nations. Those include the White Earth Nation, Mille Lacs Land of Ojibwe, and the Prairie Island Indian Community.
Under the deal, the tribe will integrate the cannabis enterprise into the state's regulated market and tracking system. Chairman Bruce M. Savage of the Fond du Lac Band said the agreement honors their sovereignty, tribal values, and their role in creating a safe and inclusive cannabis marketplace for their community and beyond. That's it for the Nevada highlights and tribal nations. I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Iconic Representation for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
I'm Alicia Bellamy for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is your Minnesota report. I'm also with the Minnesota Cannabis College and the founder of Herbs and Herbs. Minnesota just signed the 3rd Tribal State Cannabis Compact. Island Prairie Indian Community joins White Earth Nation, which is the first to open a tribal dispensary called Wabigan Mishkiki. They signed their compact August of 2023. Leech Lake, the Band of Ojibwe, who also signed their compact in April of 2024. These agreements let tribal-run cannabis businesses sell, grow, and manufacture on sovereign land. They also are able to wholesale to the Minnesota statewide marketplace, which will really help since some Minnesota license holders are flipping their pre-approvals for hopes of a healthy profit. Most say that they are selling due to supply chain issues and the slow rollout of licensure. Minnesota Department of Health has rolled out a public education campaign focused on cannabis, especially aimed at youth under 25 and the adults who support them. Herbs and Herbs is also doing community programming in North Minneapolis. This is a cannabis inclusive workshop. These workshops include conscious consumption, hydroponic growing, nurse-led discussions, and infusion cooking. The Minnesota Cannabis College will launch our maiden cohort for the cannabis cultivation and retail. These classes will start January 2026. I'm Alicia Bellamy for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is your Minnesota Report.
We've shared many stories over the past few years of our news shows that have documented the fact that more people over the age of 21 are using cannabis daily now instead of alcohol. So now, in the spirit of if you can't beat them, join them, lobbying efforts by the alcohol industry are looking to embrace THC-infused beverages. All want regulations, not the threatened bans by the federal government. Brands like Anheuser-Busch, Bacardi, Moët, Hennessy, and Molson have all put money into the lobbying efforts to fight the proposed federal THC-infused hemp ban. So now let's check in with the publicly traded stocks in the cannabis industry. Here's Doug Miller, who is always high on Wall Street.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The battle between big alcohol and hemp beverage makers just got hotter on Capitol Hill, and investors in cannabis and hemp stocks should pay close attention. New lobbying reports reveal that major alcohol giants like Bacardi, Moet Hennessy USA, and Molson Coors are spending big to influence Congress as it debates whether to ban hemp-derived THC drinks, a fast-growing category that's been eaten into beer and liquor sales. If lawmakers move toward an outright THC beverage ban, expect short-term pressure on hemp and CBD drink companies such as Canopy Growth, Charlotte's Web, and Tilray brands, all of which have exposure to infused beverages. But if Congress instead opts for stricter regulation instead of prohibition, it could validate the market, driving institutional investment and possibly lifting cannabis ETFs like MSOS and MJ. Meanwhile, alcohol conglomerates lobbying for regulation could position themselves to enter or acquire hemp drink brands, signaling a potential for mergers or acquisitions. This lobbying push shows traditional beverage companies now see cannabis not as a threat, but as the next frontier. For investors, volatility's coming, but so are the opportunities. So let's take a look at the ETF MSOS and see how that chart looks. It's trading around $4.75, and it's setting up the run again. So watch for dips, trade smart, and lock in those profits. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
Out in Washington State this past weekend, Leaf Magazine organized an event they call Halloweird. We're not kidding, that's actually what it's called. No idea what it's all about, but that's where our Washington State correspondent set up shop this week. Here's Skagit Organics' Matt Friedlander. He knows what it's all about.
Hey everyone, I'm Matthew Friedlander with Skagit Organics, coming to you with the Washington State Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. So I am down here at Joint Rivers in Auburn, Washington. We just attended Halloweird event. This is Northwest Leaf's new Halloween event. This was held down here at Joint Rivers property, just outside the retail store. It's the second event ever in Washington State that's had on-site sales and consumption. The first was Northwest Leaf's other event earlier this year, the Northwest Leaf Tour, which I believe I submitted a report for as well. But it was really cool to get along, to get in front of everybody again, to get in touch with our community, to hang out with all of our friends here in the industry. We did have some weird weather. Actually, it wasn't that weird for Washington, but we got some good gale force winds today. And I don't know, 6, 7, 12 inches of rain, something like that on the river in Tucson. It rained a lot. It was real windy. But we persevered. We did our event, talked to a lot of people. It was a good time. And we're hoping Northwest Leaf is going to help continue to push forward the social consumption aspect here in Washington State. You can see here in Washington, we still do not have any legal place to be able to purchase and consume cannabis outside of our homes. And if you are a renter or someone who lives in federal housing, you can't even smoke inside your own home even. So we've got legislative comment this year. We're really hoping to get our cannabis hospitality bill moving in the legislature coming up in January. I'll keep you updated on that, but that's what I've got for you this week. Like Matthew, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
And finally tonight, last week, we gave you some tips on how to make sure you adults out there lock up your edibles and inspect all the candy your kids collect and be aware of THC labels. And now for some fun, because as much as this holiday was supposed to be all about the kids, there's plenty of costumes for adults who want to show off their pro-cannabis spirit. For instance, here's a few examples from the Celeb Stoner newsletter that are available online. Okay, Willie Nelson lookalike is number 1. Love this costume. Or you could do the hula costume, aka Maui Wowie. And of course, if you are going to dress up, don't forget the original stoners like Tommy Chong and his co-conspirator Cheech Marin. Maybe you want to be a wheat superhero, though. Kind of looks like the old Green Hornet character, right? Or the Green Chef, which could come in handy if you get a case of the munchies on Halloween. It's the perfect night to get the munchies, right? That will do it for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Consume it responsibly and have a safe Halloween. We'll see you next week.
I think I messed up. Did you know there's a place that covers all the cannabis news you need? Pro Cannabis Media is now WPCM TV, your go-to website for things cannabis. WPCM TV is the CNBC of weed, bringing you the latest news you need.
Amy Carter. This week, she reports from inside the State House in Lansing.
I'm Amy Carter from Michigan Weedsters with this week's Michigan Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
And talk shows about all things cannabis.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all you're doing to get the word out. Like, this show is so important.
It all started back in 2018 when Emmy award-winning talk show host Jimmy Young kicked it off with the In the Weeds podcast.
That it's not just any generic paper towel. You do have a brand that you use, right?
Yeah, we live or die by the bounty. I mean,
the quicker picker-upper. I love that.
His mission? Building an army of multimedia journalists and podcast hosts who are documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. Fast forward to today, and we've got the nation's only weekly cannabis coast-to-coast news program with Alaina Pinto.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCM TV's weekly production of the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. I'm Alaina Pinto.
Delivering the nation's only TV news-style program. Since June 2021, WPCM TV has racked up over 1.3 million views with 17 million impressions and picked up over 16,000 subscribers on YouTube alone. For more information, contact the team at WPCMTV.com